The air smelled like chlorine and leather. Big cars lined the curved driveway. Spotless white walls shimmered under the noon sun, and the gold letters above the entrance read, Westvale Country Club. To most people, it was just another summer Sunday. To Amir, it was the first time he'd ever been to a place like this. He was 9, wearing a clean white thobe, his favorite kufi, gifted by his grandfather before he passed, and freshly polished shoes that squeaked every time he took a nervous step. He clung to his father's hand, eyes wide, neck craning to take in the ceiling fans spinning in perfect rhythm on the patio. It felt like another world, a world with rules he didn't understand yet. They were invited by his father's colleague for brunch. Just a casual afternoon. Just a chance for Amir to see how successful people socialize, his father had said with quiet pride. But 5 steps from the front door, everything changed. The doorman, tall, older, white, held up a hand. Not aggressive, just firm, like a traffic cop. He looked straight at Amir, then at his father. "I'm going to need you to remove that," he said, gesturing vaguely toward Amir's head. His father blinked, confused. "Excuse me." The doorman didn't flinch. Hats aren't allowed inside the club. Dress code policy. No exceptions. Amir didn't understand at first. He looked up at his father. His father looked at the doorman. Then back at him. The silence stretched, painful and dry. "No exceptions," the man repeated, this time quieter, like he knew exactly what he was saying. The man's gaze wasn't on the boy. It was on the kufi, on what it represented. Amir's mother stepped forward. "It's not a baseball cap. It's religious." The doorman shrugged, still against the policy. Behind them, other families strolled in. Polo shirts, sunglasses, khaki shorts, laughter, wine glasses. Not one of them stopped. Not one of them even noticed the scene at the door. His father exhaled slowly, looked down at Amir. Then, without a word, he gently reached for the kufi. But Amir stepped back, just once, a small involuntary shake of his head. Tears didn't fall, not yet, but something inside twisted, not from anger, from recognition. He was being told with no confusion, "You don't belong here." His father's hand froze, the doorman raised his eyebrows, and in that heavy pause, everything Amir thought about respect, access, and acceptance shifted. They left. Quietly, without entering. No brunch, no tour, no smiles. And as the heavy doors of the country club swung shut behind them, Amir didn't look back. He didn't need to. He'd already seen what he came to see. The ride home was quiet. No music, no words. Just the soft hum of tires rolling over clean pavement as Amir stared out the window, forehead pressed against the glass. He wasn't crying. But not because he wasn't hurt. He was too busy trying to understand why. His mother sat stiffly in the front seat, hands clenched in her lap. She didn't look back, didn't turn her head. And his father. His father's grip on the steering wheel said everything, knuckles white, jaw set, not angry, not yelling, just heavy. They drove past rows of perfect houses, green lawns, white fences, tall gates, and Amir wondered how many of those kids got to walk into places like that without removing a piece of themselves at the door. When they pulled into their modest driveway, no one moved at first. The engine ticked as it cooled. Then his father sighed. Deep. Long. Like he'd been holding it since the front steps of the club. "I'm sorry, Habibi," he said softly. Amir looked up. His father rarely apologized. He was proud. Stoic. The kind of man who handled life in quiet ways. "I should have said something," he added. His voice cracked just a little. That's when Amir realized something else. It wasn't just him who'd been made small. They all had. Inside the house, Amir went straight to his room. The kufi lay gently on his dresser, untouched, still clean, still sacred. But suddenly, it looked like a target. He sat on the bed and replayed the doorman's words. No exceptions. He wasn't sure what was worse, being told he couldn't come in, or watching his father almost take it off, not out of shame, but out of survival. Because that's what it meant to live like them, to always weigh dignity against access, to be polite in the face of insult, to teach your children to navigate rejection without making a scene. Downstairs, his parents spoke in hushed tones. He caught fragments. Just a boy. How many times do we have to swallow this? He looked at him like he wasn't even human. Later that night, his father knocked and entered with 2 mugs of warm milk, sat beside him, said nothing. Then finally, "You don't have to change to be allowed in, Amir." Long pause. "But you may have to build the kind of place where no one has to." Amir didn't fully understand what that meant yet, but he nodded. And deep inside his young chest, something began to grow, not bitterness, not rage, but a quiet fire. It started with chalk lines. The next afternoon, Amir took his little brother's sidewalk chalk and drew a soccer field on the cracked pavement of the alley behind their building. It wasn't perfect. The goals were crooked, the lines were shaky, but it was his. He kicked an old, half-deflated ball between the garage walls for an hour, maybe 2. No referees, no crowd, just him and the bounce of the ball echoing in the space no one ever looked at twice. That's where it began, not in a real stadium, not in a school gym, in the silence after rejection. He didn't tell anyone, not yet, but something about that simple act, that chalk, those makeshift sidelines, it gave him control. Out there, he didn't have to take anything off to be allowed in. There wasn't a door. And maybe, just maybe, that's what made it powerful. At school, things were different now. He looked at places differently. He noticed who got picked first, who got invited, who got scolded for being too loud, too different, too disruptive. He wasn't bitter. He was tracking patterns. He started showing up early to PE, practicing kicks, studying movement, watching YouTube tutorials at night on ball control, stamina drills, strategy. He built routines on loose notebook pages. Nobody told him what to do. No coach, no structure, just him, and the memory of being unwanted. His father noticed the change. "You're training for something?" he asked one day. Amir shrugged. "Not yet." "What's the goal?" Amir looked up from tying his shoes, paused, then said softly, "To build something I can't be kicked out of." His father didn't respond, just stared at him for a moment, and nodded. Not in approval, but in understanding. It was the kind of nod men gave each other when they realized the world wouldn't change for them. So they'd have to change what the world offered. That night, Amir added a new line to the corner of his chalk field. It didn't mark a boundary. It marked where the dream began. There were no lines, no bleachers, no referees, just dust, broken fences, and the worn-out silence of places forgotten by city maps. Amir played anyway. Every afternoon after school, he headed straight to the abandoned lot 2 blocks down from his building, the one where grass grew in patches, and the asphalt had long surrendered to weeds and glass shards. It wasn't a field by anyone's standards. But to him, it was a proving ground, a laboratory, a place where he could miss a shot, fix his form, and try again, without anyone watching, without anyone laughing, without anyone telling him he wasn't dressed right, or praying too often, or standing in the wrong place. While other kids rushed home to gaming consoles or noisy group chats, Amir practiced alone. He didn't just play, he studied movement, how his body turned, where his foot landed, how the ball responded. He'd record himself with a beat-up tablet and then re-watch it at night like film study. He tracked his own progress in notebooks filled with messy arrows, diagrams, and short notes like, "Too fast on the turn," "Left foot needs work," "Balance off center," "Fix core." There was no applause, no encouragement, just discipline. That's the thing people didn't see about kids like Amir. They assumed silence meant weakness. But silence, when chosen, becomes sharp, focused, dangerous, especially in someone who remembers exactly what exclusion feels like. At school, he kept his head down. His grades were steady, never exceptional. Teachers didn't notice him unless they had to. He wasn't loud, he wasn't trouble. And maybe that's why no one realized he was preparing for something bigger than high school. He started skipping birthday parties, weekend sleepovers, even Eid picnics, just to stay in rhythm. One night, as he walked home late from practice, his friend Kareem caught up with him and asked, "Bro, what are you even doing all this for? There's no scouts watching us out here. You think this gets you into the league?" Amir didn't stop walking. He just said, "This isn't for them." Kareem didn't press. Some things don't need explaining. At home, his parents worried. They didn't understand how someone could work so hard without a visible reward. His mother asked why he never signed up for school tryouts. His father gently suggested he might consider a more balanced schedule. But Amir kept going, not because he expected someone to open a door for him, but because he had already decided he would build his own. Every kick, every sprint, every drop of sweat was one brick in a place he hadn't drawn yet, but one day would stand on, and when it did, no one would have to take anything off to walk in. They were called the Side Street 11, a scrappy mix of school friends, cousins, and neighborhood kids who played like their next meal depended on it. No jerseys, no sponsors, just mismatched cleats and unmatched hunger. They trained wherever they could, parking lots, gravel lots, even a strip of overgrown grass behind the public library. When Amir heard about the city tournament, hosted at none other than Westvale Country Club, the same place he'd been turned away from years ago, he saw a door crack open. Not wide, but enough. He rallied his teammates, filed the application, and scraped together the $75 registration fee from lunch money and weekend shifts. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe, maybe they won't care who we are if we just play well enough. He was wrong. The day before the tournament, Amir received a phone call from the event coordinator, a woman with a clipped voice and a smile you could hear through the receiver. "We're reviewing your team's registration, Amir," she said. "But we noticed a few concerns: uniform code, equipment standards, and we also wanted to remind all players that religious displays or rituals during matches are not permitted on club grounds." He paused. "Religious displays?" "Public prayer," she clarified. "It's a policy. Keeps the focus on the sport." There was a long silence. Then Amir asked, "So, if I pray before the match, I'll be disqualified?" She didn't answer right away. Eventually, she said, "Let's just say it's discouraged." The next morning, he stood with his team at the edge of the parking lot, eyes fixed on the pristine fields he'd once only seen through chain-link fences. The other teams arrived in branded buses, with matching tracksuits, coaches barking orders, parents unloading coolers. Amir's team? They arrived in Ubers and hand-me-down hoodies. And just before kickoff, Amir stepped to the side to perform a quick prayer. Nothing loud, nothing theatrical. Just a few seconds of silence, but that was all it took. A volunteer jogged over, holding a clipboard. "Sorry, can't have that here. You'll need to stop or leave." Amir stood, expression unreadable. Behind him, his teammates shifted awkwardly. No one said a word. And in that moment, it hit him harder than any tackle ever could. It wasn't just about who played better. It was about who belonged, who was welcome, who was invisible unless made to disappear. He looked out at the field, the grass, the bleachers, the goalposts lined in perfect white. Then he looked at the man in the Westvale polo shirt, who watched it all unfold without blinking. Amir turned to his team. "Let's go," he said. "But we didn't even play," one of them whispered. "I know," Amir replied. And he walked away. Not because he was weak, because this time he knew. If you have to erase who you are just to be allowed in, you're not stepping into opportunity, you're stepping into surrender. That night the world didn't end. There was no viral video, no protest, no outrage from the school board, just silence. A silence that stretched across Amir's room like fog, dense, unmoving, hard to breathe through. His soccer cleats sat by the door, still muddy from the field he never stepped onto. His folded prayer mat lay untouched on his desk. And in his notebook, the one filled with drills, game plans, and bracket predictions, he wrote a single sentence in the top corner of the page. They don't deserve our talent. Not bitter, not angry, just true. Downstairs, his father watched an old match replay with the volume low. His mother ironed quietly in the next room, glancing up every so often but saying nothing. They hadn't asked what happened. They didn't need to. Amir emerged from his room and stood at the hallway edge. "Baba," he said. His father muted the TV. "Yes?" Amir hesitated. "I don't want to play for them anymore." His father nodded slowly, understanding the unspoken parts. "You never were," he said. That night, Amir didn't sleep early. He stayed up on his phone, scrolling not through soccer highlights, but articles about urban planning, athletic infrastructure, and accessible community programs. He looked at how sports centers were built, who funded them, and why most never existed near kids like him. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, but every link, every image of a stadium with wide gates and bright lights whispered the same message. You could build something better. The next morning, he texted his coach from school. "Coach, I'm out. I'll train on my own." When his friends asked why, he just said, "I'm not trying to get in anymore. I'm building the door." And so, at 16, Amir began training differently. Less about drills, more about discipline. He ran in the mornings, he studied in the afternoons, he stayed in the library after dark, not to do homework, but to learn how systems were made. He wasn't dreaming of playing in someone else's stadium anymore. He was drafting blueprints. The email arrived on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. Subject line: "Congratulations on your admission and full scholarship offer." At first, Amir thought it was spam. He'd applied late, almost out of impulse, to a university 3 states away, a school known more for its architecture program than its athletic department. But buried in the application was an optional essay he'd poured himself into, titled, "Why I Won't Just Play, I'll Build." He never expected anyone to read it. Turns out they did. And more than that, they saw him. The scholarship wasn't for soccer. It was for something better. A dual major, sports science and urban design. A strange combination, one that most advisors didn't recommend, but Amir knew exactly what he was doing. One taught him how athletes moved, what they needed to thrive, how bodies grew and broke down under pressure. The other taught him how spaces moved, how buildings lived or failed based on who they included or excluded. He didn't just want to create fields, he wanted to design freedom. College life wasn't easy. He didn't blend in. He still prayed between classes, still wore his kufi on Fridays, still corrected professors when they mispronounced his name. But now, people asked questions. They didn't always understand, but they listened. And when they didn't listen, he documented. Every architecture project he submitted had one thing in common: access, fields without fences, entrances without dress codes, facilities that didn't require your name to sound expensive. One professor pulled him aside after a presentation. "You keep designing buildings like you're angry," Amir smiled. "I'm not angry," he said. "I'm remembering." During his 3rd year, he landed an internship at a sports architecture firm that had built stadiums across the country. He took notes, stayed late, asked questions no intern ever asked. By the time he graduated, his portfolio wasn't full of fantasy renderings. It was full of real-world plans for communities that had none. Not blueprints, declarations. He kept a photo on his dorm wall. It was blurry, old. A picture of the gates of Westvale Country Club taken from the backseat of his father's car years ago. He never said it aloud. But every test, every design, every sleepless night was pushing him one step closer to that fence. Not to cross it, to erase it. The listing was barely a paragraph long. Commercial plot, 3.2 acres, zoned for mixed use, adjacent to Westvale Country Club, priced below market value for quick sale. Most people would have scrolled past. Amir didn't. He recognized the property instantly. It was the gravel-covered stretch of land that had always sat awkwardly beside the country club, undeveloped, unloved, half-forgotten. For years it had been a buffer zone, a space no one used, except as overflow parking during fancy events. To the club, it was dead space. To Amir, it was sacred. He stared at the screen like it was fate knocking twice. That night, he didn't sleep. He opened up old sketches. Plans he'd drawn as a student but never showed anyone. Not concept art, not dream buildings, but something different. He called it open field theory. A stadium that wasn't just for athletes, but for community. A place where no one was turned away for how they dressed, how they prayed, or where they were from. No VIP boxes, no marble lobbies, just good design, open access, and gates that stayed open. He had no money, but he had something just as powerful. A vision people wanted to believe in. Over the next 4 months, Amir pitched his idea everywhere. Small business grants, alumni networks, crowdfunding campaigns. He spoke at schools, mosques, rec centers, anywhere people would listen. He didn't ask for charity, he offered ownership. "This won't be my stadium," he'd say. "It'll be ours." Some laughed, some listened, and some wrote checks, because you can only ignore brilliance for so long before it finds its own microphone. Finally, one late afternoon, he sat in a cramped office across from a realtor in a cheap gray suit. "You sure you want this lot?" the man asked. "It's not in the best shape. Drainage problems. Weird shape. Can't do much with it, especially next to that." He meant the club. Amir smiled. "I'm not building what they built," he said. "I'm building what they never could." The paperwork took 11 days. The sale closed on a Tuesday. And just like that, the land beside the gate that once rejected him now belonged to him. He didn't tell anyone at Westvale. He didn't need to. But a week later, when the first steel fence came down and construction markers went up, the whispers inside those gold-lettered walls got loud. The trucks arrived before sunrise, flatbeds, cranes, concrete mixers. They lined the quiet street beside Westvale like a quiet army. No press, no announcement, just movement. By mid-morning, the old chain-link fence had been ripped out, and bright orange survey markers dotted the earth like breadcrumbs leading somewhere sacred. People noticed, especially the ones sipping espresso on Westvale's sun-soaked patio. The ones who had spent decades looking past that empty lot were now forced to look at it. Inside the club, tension brewed behind glass doors and linen tablecloths. Who bought the land? Are they expanding the club? Is it apartments? A strip mall? No one knew, because Amir didn't talk. He just built. Every day, he stood in boots and a hard hat, side by side with contractors and civil engineers. He took no office, used no title, just a folding chair, a clipboard, and the original sketch from his student portfolio. Faded now, but still taped at the corner. People began stopping on the sidewalk, asking questions, watching. Someone handed him a thermos of tea one day. Another dropped off a tray of homemade sambusas. Old neighbors, new ones, strangers. They didn't ask what he was building. They asked, "When can we come in?" Meanwhile, inside Westvale, things were shifting. You see, exclusivity only works when the excluded want in. But now, they were watching people walk towards something else. Not luxury, but dignity. One board member approached Amir at the property line, leaning casually against a concrete post. "Interesting project you've got going," he said, forcing a smile. "Anything we should be aware of?" Amir didn't stop measuring. "You'll know when the lights come on," he said, then turned away. The next week, someone from the club offered to discuss partnership opportunities. He declined, politely, firmly, because this wasn't for negotiation, this was for history. The scoreboard went up before the walls, not because there was a game, but because people needed to see something finished. It read, "The People's Field, opening soon." And as workers drilled into the ground where overflow cars once parked, Amir looked across the fence and wondered, when you've always had the power, what does it feel like to watch someone build without your permission? The Westvale dining room had never been this tense. For years it had been a sanctuary of sameness, menu rotations, quarterly newsletters, golf tournaments with the same smiling winners, a place where comfort lived in predictability, But now, nothing felt certain. People whispered over mimosas. They tilted their sunglasses to spy through the hedges. The construction had been going for months, and still, no one inside the club knew what exactly was being built just feet from their tennis courts. Theories bloomed like weeds. A housing project, a training camp, a political stunt. But there was one detail they couldn't ignore: the man running it. Someone remembered. Someone always remembers. The quiet boy, turned away at the door years ago, the one with the head covering, the one who didn't come back. Until now. Inside the club, the board met more frequently. Can we issue a complaint to the city? Can we buy him out? What if it brings down property values? But it was too late. The permits were approved. The land was his. And every bolt in the bleachers, every brick in the locker rooms, every solar panel on the roof screamed a truth no committee could silence. He didn't just buy the land. He claimed the future. Amir never raised his voice, never gave a press statement, never held a grudge publicly. But every detail of the new facility was a message. The open gates, the multi-faith prayer rooms, the pay-what-you-can ticket model, the youth mentorship programs built into the game schedule, the free uniforms, the co-ed teams, no velvet ropes, no dress codes, no glances that say, "You're not one of us." The club tried to get ahead of the storm. They offered a media interview, tried to rebrand themselves as champions of community. They painted a new mural by the front entrance, kids of all backgrounds smiling under a tree. But the timing made it obvious. Everyone saw the truth. The club wasn't evolving. It was reacting, and for once, it wasn't the center of gravity. People were lining up down the street, not to get into Westvale, but to see what was rising next door. One local journalist finally tracked Amir down as he supervised a late delivery at dusk. "You've refused interviews for months," she said, "but everyone wants to know. Why here? Why now?" Amir looked out over the floodlights being tested, illuminating fresh turf that hadn't yet been played on. Then he spoke. Calm, clear, direct. "Because this is where I was told I didn't belong." She blinked. "And now?" He smiled, just a little. "Now no one has to ask." The day before the opening, the stadium was quiet. Not unfinished, not chaotic, just breathing. It sat in silence like a held breath before the roar, a place once imagined now real enough to feel under your shoes, the kind of real that hums in your chest when you know you're about to witness something shift. Amir arrived before the sun, not because there was anything left to fix, but because some buildings demand to be seen in their silence, before the noise, before the lights, before anyone else gets to claim it. He walked the perimeter slowly, hands buried in his coat, head slightly bowed, not in exhaustion, but in reverence. This was the same stretch of land where he once stood as a child, watching a world that had already decided he didn't fit into it. But now, that same soil held something else. His fingerprints in the concrete, his voice in the walls, his faith carved into every decision made along the way. Inside, everything was ready. The turf was clean, the goals anchored deep, the bleachers gently curved to make space for those who had never been given space before. Along the inner walls, instead of advertisements, hung words etched in both English and Arabic, quotes about community, dignity, and the power of showing up when no one expects you to. Every corner of the stadium whispered the same unspoken truth. This was never about revenge. It was about rewriting what access means. There were no marble statues, no executive skyboxes, no reserved parking spots with gold lettering, just real seats, real people, and real openness. Amir made sure of that. He'd sat with the architects for weeks, rejecting designs that felt too elitist, too polished, too much like the world he'd grown up watching from behind a fence. He wanted kids to walk through the gates and feel like they belonged before they even sat down. He wanted parents to bring their children not for spectacle, but for sanctuary. He didn't sleep much that night, not because of nerves, but because peace has a way of keeping you awake when it's finally yours. At 3 a.m., he stood in the middle of the field under the test lights, closed his eyes, and for the first time since he was 9 years old, he didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like the architect of something sacred. And then, the morning came. They started arriving before dawn. Families, teenagers, elders with canes, women in hijab, men in denim jackets, kids with mismatched sneakers and hopeful eyes. Some came walking, some by city bus, some by bikes held together with zip ties and faith. They lined up along the sidewalk, not because of advertising or fame, but because they'd heard, "There's a place that's opening where you don't need to explain who you are to get in." And in that line, among the noise and the motion, stood a boy, 9, maybe 10, dressed in a soft white thobe, a small kufi sitting proudly on his head. He held his mother's hand, clutched a beat-up soccer ball under his arm, and stared at the massive gates like they held the world behind them. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. A volunteer spotted him, walked over slowly, and knelt down to meet his gaze. With a gentle smile, he said, "You're exactly who this place was built for." And with that, the gates opened. Not because the clock struck a certain hour, not because someone in a suit gave a speech, but because finally, someone like that boy didn't have to wait for permission. The crowd poured in. No tickets were checked, no dress codes enforced, no questions asked about background, belief, or bank account. Just hands on shoulders, neighbors finding seats together, and kids sprinting down the aisles as if joy had finally been legalized. No VIPs, no ropes, no one turned away. And Amir? He stood at the top of the stands, alone, hoodie up, hands in his coat pockets, watching it unfold. No one recognized him. There were no cameras, no podium, no spotlight. Just him and the view, the field alive, the people free, the air thick with a kind of quiet justice no speech could capture. Someone beside him muttered, half joking, "Can you imagine what the Westvale board is thinking right now?" Amir didn't laugh. He didn't even look over. He just kept watching, then said, "Let them imagine. We've already built it." And in that moment, as the sounds of 100 voices filled a stadium once drawn in silence, Amir closed his eyes, not because he was overwhelmed, but because he was finally home. He didn't win anything. He replaced something. He didn't kick down a door. He made it irrelevant. Because the truth is, some people spend their lives trying to fit into rooms that were never built for them. And others, they build something so bold, so open, so undeniable, that the old rooms start to feel small. So let me ask you one thing. If they lock the gates to keep you out, what will you build that they can't keep anyone from walking into?